Every single week, Hamster's Arcade Archives gets a new release of a classic arcade title from ages past, and more often than not, it's a shmup. So what's on tap this week? Is it cool enough to sink more time into? Is it fresh enough to do more than a credit feed? Is it worth our time, or will it end up being forgotten again? We're going shmup adjacent again with Namco's System 2 Run & Gunner Finest Hour. It looks pretty slick and it talks a big game, so we're gonna see what's up in this episode of Bullet Heaven. Could this really be one of Namco's very best? Finest Hour is a run-and-gunner developed and published by Namco in September of 1989. This one stayed firmly in Japanese arcades, but it did see a release to the Wii's Virtual Console on August 25, 2009, also only in Japan. Thankfully for the rest of the world, Hamster's Arcade Archives picked up the baton and finally released Finest Hour worldwide to the Switch and PS4 on September 27, 2023. So after so long, was it worth the wait? Let's take a closer look. As far as run-and-gunners go in general, Finest Hour takes a decidedly different approach to the whole thing. For one, movement is kind of sluggish, which makes sense because you're piloting a big old mech called the Cygnus. No worries though, as when you double tap the direction you want to go, the Cygnus will dash in that direction. What's cool about this is when a bit of momentum is achieved, you can feather the controls to kind of coast along while not moving too fast, all while laying down some generally satisfying firepower. A duck function is also featured in, which helps in evading certain fire. Of course, colliding with obstacles and enemies will stop you dead in your tracks. So in addition to a bit of memorization for the stage elements, the Defender-style radar on the bottom of the screen is super handy to see what's coming up. Well, at least in regards to the enemies. Finest Hour has a simple 3-button setup that allows players to fire their gun, change their targeting, and activate verniers for huge jumps. It's all not as sharp as, say, Gunhound EX, but I want to say it's probably better than what we saw in Assault Suit Lanos. The Cygnus's shots are somewhat slow, but infinite, and allows for reasonable damage to be dealt to whatever happens to be targeted by the reticle on screen. While this targeting generally occurs automatically, you could also hit the targeting button to change what you're firing at. Rapid button presses will also increase the rate of fire ever so slightly. Getting hit will increase the amount of heat the Cygnus will need to deal with, and generally it'll reduce as the player does what they need to do. Defeating enemies also reduces this temperature faster, or so it seems. But it's easy to get hit by a bomb balloon or missile salvo, which can increase the heat to near critical levels, or completely in some cases, almost immediately. It feels, generally speaking, as if taking damage is just part of the game, and managing it is something that was factored into its design, and I'm actually alright with that. Of course, sitting around and waiting for the Cygnus's temperatures to fall also has its pitfalls, as each stage is also timed. If the timer reaches 0, the cooling system will break and heat will steadily rise until it destroys the mech. It's possible to dash to the end, but since enemy fire only adds to the heat, it makes things that much more difficult in a panic. Thankfully, learning the stage layouts of each of Finest Hour's 4 areas should allow for decent routing to be achieved in no time. There's actually not a ton of it from a memorization point of view. Finest Hour plays over the course of 5 stages across these 4 areas, which loop twice for a total of 10. While these stages aren't especially long, they're also not especially easy. But in general, when you know what you're doing, Finest Hour is a lot of fun to play, and even has a bit of speedrun potential. Yes, some stages and enemies are cheap as hell, and it's extremely easy to get overwhelmed. But generally, not only did I feel more and more comfortable with each subsequent attempt at the game, and making decent headway as a result, I actively wanted to go back for more. Of course, once again, the ACA version features an interrupt save that makes practicing a hard spot super efficient. Though, as some of our viewers have also said in the past, we do wish more save state slots could be made available. Generally speaking, there's not a ton to write home about when it comes to the scoring in Finest Hour. Just destroy stuff and the points will flow. But finishing a stage will also result in a score based on how much time is left. A multiplier of 100 is applied to the timer value, resulting in a stage end time bonus. Due to this, there is a little in the way of risk-reward due to the time limits in each stage. Do you mop up as many enemies as you can? Do you wait out a particularly high temperature? Or do you race to the end of the stage with reckless abandon instead? In any case, this ACA release also features online leaderboards for the base game, a more strict score attack, and of course, the always present timed caravan mode. These extra incentives once again give the ACA version of Finest Hour some surprisingly long legs, and should do a decent job satisfying high-score chasers. At a glance, Finest Hour has a pretty good presentation. The mech design is fairly decent and their animations are adequate. There's also all kinds of parallax to the backgrounds, and large explosions don't just light up the stage with a red hue, they do so layer by layer, and it's a pretty cool effect. On the other hand though, there's not a ton in the way of enemy variety, so things might look a bit stale in later stages. It's also light on exposition, giving the game a little bit of a disconnect when it comes to the plot. I mean, it's simple enough clearly, but maybe there's just not quite enough? The exception to this lies in the game over sequence. Things get way too dramatic when the Cygnus is destroyed. Like, just give me a countdown and a final screen or something. Make it quick so I can either get back to the game or friggin' restart already. Come on. Sound-wise, I like where Finest Hour goes in general, but the sound effects are pretty overpowering and fairly repetitive, making things feel a little tiring over time. The music does a good job, but it's definitely no Dragon Saber and it frequently gets drowned out by other effects. Limited options exist to adjust the audio, but nothing to independently change the effect and music volumes, so there is that. Also of note are various scanline options for those that enjoy that kind of effect. Me, I stick with raw pixels to maintain a decent image after YouTube does its thing with compression and such. One other last thing that I recently discovered are these cool scans of the original arcade instruction sheets in the in-game manual. That's a nice touch. So, with all this said, let's get into my final thoughts. Finest Hour has some interesting nuance to its control that makes it feel very natural once you get the hang of things. And while it's a little on the short side, it's also a game that feels as if it's somewhat less punishingly difficult than many of its era, despite maintaining a decent challenge, especially in its extra loop. Its visuals are great, if somewhat limited, and its sound also works well despite its effects drowning out the music accompanying them. All in all, Finest Hour has a great fun factor that has me going back to improve my runs with new tactics and time-saving on missions to get to the end as unscathed as possible, which also plays into the great ACA score attack modes. In short, it was much better than I expected. By this time, the newest Arcade Archives is now also available, and I'm gonna get to it as soon as I can. But this begs the question, should we do a monthly roundup of ACA instead of one video every time a shooter is released? Cause like, this is 5 in a row. I'll be honest, there's precious little time to get an episode for each one of these that lands, plus the bigger releases. They'll be slightly pared down, but still plenty informative. There's a lot more that's catching my eye these days, especially with this thing in our possession. Oh wait, no, I meant this. But ACA is very important too, so let me know below and I can save the latest ACA for that kind of a feature. That said, with the Heaven project complete and out of the way, I'll be able to get Raiden 3 out of the way as well. And then it's on to other more interesting things. We'll see you all in the next episode.